Shyama Rose. She's Director of Software Security Engineering at CBS. And she's going to be talking about successful application security programs in an uncertain landscape. Let's give a round of applause to Shyama Rose.
You need this?
All right. Can you guys hear me back there? I'll be in the back. All right. Thanks. These things are hard. Okay. So that was a good keynote. I'm actually really glad to be following up after you on that because I think that, we all know that we've got problems, right? So where do we go from here? And that's kind of what I'm going to be talking about to you today. So my name's Shyama Rose. I'm the Director of Software Security Engineering at CBS Corporate. So I handle all of our subsidiaries as well. We've got 22 subsidiaries. I do all of application security, vulnerability management, and vendor management. So I know I've got problems, but I'm trying to make AppSec not one. I also do a little bit of lecturing over at NYU Poly in Dan Guido's application security course. So if you guys ever get an opportunity to look at his videos online, they're really valuable, and I think you can take away a lot from them. And we've got some other instructors up here in the front as well. I'm also a contributor for the Center for Internet Security. I've done a lot of the benchmarks that you see up there, so a lot of the Microsoft-focused benchmarks. A while ago, I also did some writing for the Uninformed Journal on code coverage analysis in the kernel. And I've previously been a security program manager for companies like Veracode. I was also a penetration tester and security consultant, and that's where I came from. So I have a very technical background, but I'm also more management oriented, so fusing those two together is my specialty, and that's really what I want to talk to you guys about today. How many of you guys work in an enterprise, or are you more, I'm not really sure what you guys focus on here a lot in Iceland, if there's more huge enterprises that you're working with here, or are they more small development type shops? Can I get a raise of hand for enterprise? Okay, there's a lot. And how many of you are really responsible for all of the AppSec in your organization, or at least part of it? Whether you're pen testing or discovering vulnerabilities, trying to figure out what you're going to do with them at the end of the day, is that something that you guys focus on? Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about the state of application security in general. Application security as a whole, where we're at, and I might glaze over that a little bit because you covered a lot of that. I think I have a slide or two that's very similar. And then talk about how we're going to take care of the problem. So really looking at it from a strategic perspective. We've got a million vulnerabilities. What am I going to do with them? How am I going to get my entire enterprise and organization to shift to that security mindset that we really want to get integrated within all of our development and within our management as well. So tackling it from the ground up and the top down. All right. What I started noticing when I started putting application security programs together is that I don't know what I'm looking at when I'm downloading, the Microsoft SDL PDF. I don't know what other organizations are doing to solve this problem. Where do I even start? I've got applications, all over the place. I've got development teams across the world. I've got managers who really just want to get things launched. Where do I start? It's so overwhelming. And this is the slide I'm going to glaze over, but the state of the threat landscape, we've really moved more from, the worm-centric early 2000 types of threats to the lulz or the anti-sec or anonymous that we talked about. A lot of the vulnerabilities that we are dealing with used to be, or still are, but very outside of our control. So, flaws within Microsoft technologies may not be necessarily our focus so much anymore. Don't challenge me on that, but as an enterprise, I want to look at the vulnerabilities inside my organization. Am I introducing these vulnerabilities into my code and out to the public? A lot less apolitical back then. Now it's more hacktivist-based. We weren't quite sure where the attacks were coming from. Now we kind of know. We know what's driving them a little bit more. They were more service-driven, and now they're very data-driven. People are trying to steal and distribute data, and those are our enterprise's crown jewels. So that's what we want to focus our programs on. The state of the enterprise, this to me is, I think, the key for tackling this problem. We're super hyper-rapid. We're super quickly developing out applications, pushing them out to the web. They're not really going through gating process. or any type of QA whatsoever. We're not even doing any sort of automated analysis on these applications a lot of the times. So, and the problem is that all of the business units that may be involved are different types of development methodologies. We've got Agile, we've got combination. It's hard to standardize your application security programs around these problems. We've also got increasing regulations. So a lot of people are just, or a lot of organizations are really just doing what they have to, so PCI compliance and whatnot. A lot of the verticals, so you've got banking, media, for instance, what I'm in charge of, completely different in their capabilities, tolerance, and appetite for security in general. Media companies may have less interest in security in general just because the data that they're pushing out there is mostly public anyway. We're not focusing that much on application security these days, believe it or not, in these organizations. You'd like to think that we are, but sometimes we're not. And that's where our job comes in. So here's an example. Let's say you've got an enterprise that is really huge. You've got different development houses. You've got app-centric, internal type of applications. And then you've got the other side of the house, which is all web-based. On the old side, you've got ad hoc development, no QA, no gating. It's all abstracted from the internet. It's inflexible management. They don't really care. They think they're safe because they're not publicly facing. On the website, it's quicker, internet-facing. You've got flexible management. They know that they're more vulnerable to threats from the outside, so they're going to try to gate a little bit more and put a little bit more focus on it. But given these varying methodologies, how do you strategize your application security programs to tackle both of these different types of problems across your organization? Do you guys have problems like this where your companies are split down the middle, you have varying types of applications that you're dealing with? Or is it you just have one, your Microsoft, maybe you've got Office? Okay. So the state of the enterprise, or where I see application security programs today, I would say a lot of it is really more in the ad hoc section. They're covering what they have to as they can. It's too hard to cover 3,000 applications, right? So one of CBS Corporate's subsidiaries is CBS Interactive, and I'm sure you guys heard about the last FM issue a couple of months ago, which was part of the LinkedIn password leaking situation. When you've got 3,000 sites in one subsidiary, it's hard to develop a program around that. So you're sort of spot testing things. You're trying to figure out where you can fix, when you can. It's all opt-in. You're missing policy. There's no regulation around it. The data that leaks is not data that is corporate sensitive, or it's more personally identifiable information that's being leaked. You've got no application portfolio there, so you're not even sure what applications you have. That's what I see the most, or that's what I have seen the most in my consulting days. That sort of matures into the program, or the AppSec program, where it's a little bit benchmarked. You kind of know what the landscape of your applications are. You know where your problems may lie. Your teams are a little bit more educated. They're developing maybe with SQL injection in mind, and that would be a great step, I think. But it's not that operational. It's not seamless. It's not headless. You're still struggling with everything. Mature application security programs are more distributed. They're scalable. It's less about the vulnerability and more about the process that you're putting around it, right? So no matter, and this is true for everything like incident response. It's true for vulnerability management. Whatever processes you build around your security programs have to be flexible enough and scalable enough that it shouldn't matter what the size of your organization is at the end of the day. Okay, so we know what the problem is. We know what our threats are. We know how our organization is not fitting into fixing the application security program. You are the AppSec manager. You're now the designated AppSec manager within your enterprise, and you have no idea where to start. How do you start solving this problem? I know you guys maybe have heard of the security development lifecycle. It's Microsoft's response to some issues that they were having in the early 2000s. They really put it together to try to solve this scale problem and hoping to prevent and be more proactive with application security in general. There were several other methodologies and frameworks that came out in the past few years or so to fill the gaps that SDL didn't cover, and that was things like maturity models, benchmarking, more of a governance surrounding application security. So there's a couple of different methodologies that security development lifecycle covers, and that's really Agile and Waterfall. It started out as Waterfall. I think the Agile methodology that Microsoft put out is a good starting point. I do think it is very immature, and I think that that's something that enterprises like the one that I work for can help build out. The problem with SDL, while I think it's great in theory, and I think it's great in PDF format, I think that when you when you are actually trying to sit down and make this work in an organization, it's incredibly bloated. It's very heavy. It's difficult to implement. You're not Microsoft. You don't have their development processes. What do you do when you have this? I worked with Brandon. We had this problem working together because we didn't know where to start, and we had this exact issue. So when we're talking about application security programs, I just want to define it very quickly. The goal of an application security program is to protect your assets, your interests, and the stakeholders of the enterprise, okay? And that's usually applications or data-centric. But you need to design your programs with the notion that the enterprise is going to face continuous threats, whatever they are. They're evolving. They're worms yesterday. They're, lulls today. They're going to be something else tomorrow. Regardless of what they are, you have to design it with the notion in mind that you are not going to be controlled by these external threats, okay? And I think that is the real tenet of an application security program. That's your goal, to protect the enterprise. All right. I meant to remove these icons, but, and I'll explain them in just a little bit. I think a successful application security program doesn't necessarily mean that you haven't been breached. Some of the best application security programs come out of companies that have been breached. It's their success story. It's their zero to hero. Microsoft is a good example of that. I think they really paved the way for us to be able to put more focus on application security as a whole. Sometimes they fail gracefully. So I think Zappos is a good example of that. They had their issue a few months ago, maybe 6 months ago, where a lot of their passwords and user information got leaked. I think they recovered very nicely from that. I have no way of telling what they're doing internally, but I can say that their external communications on that subject were, I think, fairly good. They informed their users really well. And I think the best application security programs that you can find will sail smoothly through rough seas. So when you have these breaches on the internal side, they're operating and recovering very quickly. They're moving their development units and their business units to a more secure manner. All right, so how we're going to get there, the tactics or the strategy. I spend most of my day thinking about strategy, or really how to get people to do things. So there's a couple of different ways that I split strategy, and I call them soft and hard tactics. So to me, soft tactics are really the art of application security, and that means more things like strategy and politics and understanding your organization as a whole. What's their tolerance? How are they structured? How are you going to get application security into these business units? What is the culture like? Do they care? Do we want them to care, or do we want to just make it headless? And how dedicated are we to application security in enterprise as a whole? Okay, the hard tactics are probably what you're going to be more familiar with. These are the things like the SDL. This is the science, or the how-to, or how to create and roll out an application security program. We all know that we need AppSec. We all know that we have 1.5 million vulnerabilities, but really if we can't execute it on it, and this is the same for entrepreneurial ventures as well, like if you can't execute on your idea, then it just falls flat. So these are the processes, the governance, the policy, the metrics, all the execution and performance that is rolled around application security in general. Okay, so talking about the soft tactics, I've given this talk before in a much shorter or a longer format, and since this is shorter, I'm going to focus more on the soft tactics and less on the hard tactics. And I think when, are you going to distribute the slides? Okay. In the appendix, there's going to be a lot of templates in there for you guys to pull out and use, and hopefully that will be helpful to you, but there'll be more focus on the soft tactics here. Okay, so when we talk about culture, and he went over culture and the mindset, and really starting to have security roll off the tongue smoothly of our developers in our enterprises, culture is fundamentally a huge tenet of the security development lifecycle. It really means to develop security with security in mind, follow the checklist, security best practices, the guidelines, make security a priority. That means that throughout the development lifecycle, you're actually checking to see if your code is secure. It needs to be top-down, exec supported, and really pushed hard. I want to make a point that it needs to be more than that. The culture needs to be more than just build security in. You want to make it collaborative, so less contentious. You don't want to have the security development fissure that is common. Get your development teams to actually really care about it. It needs to be more positive, so we as security people tend to focus on all of the bad things in our code. Oh, we have one here, we have this bad coding practice. This team's introducing all these vulnerabilities into the code all the time. What are we going to do with them? And there's a lot of bad blood that goes on because of that. So start pointing out when your development teams are actually doing things right? So focus on the good. And make it very empirically driven. So everything that you do, back it up with data. And Rafi can talk about that. Data and metrics are huge. And representing that in the way you represent it to your management is really important. That is going to back up all of these statements that you make to management. Also, don't just focus on top-down. Don't just focus on your CISO or your CTO for pushing out application security. Start targeting your developers or people at the lower level. Get them involved. Make it fun. Make it a game. Make it competitive. And have development drive it. Paranoia is also something that I want to talk about. Okay. We as security people are naturally paranoid, and we use it a lot to our disadvantage, but we can also use it to our advantage as well. There's a couple different types of paranoia that I really think that we focus on. We're either under paranoid, too paranoid, or what I like to call perfectly paranoid. So hyper-paranoia, I think, is the worst in this case. You really have the ability to drown out your enterprise and get them totally overloaded with security isms. This means that you have a very customer and service oriented impact on your organization. You're blocking timelines. We have to check this and that. You are not focusing on the business and what they need at all. So if you're constantly being a security speed bump, for example, you're not going to get anywhere and get any buy-in that way. So you don't want to follow the herd. Don't jump on the media-centric hype bandwagon that we all tend to focus on. Focus on your real problems. Know what your real problems are and focus on those. Don't overreact to threats and incidents. Don't spend all of your time focusing and freaking out over whether or not you have an incident. We all have incidents. We all have problems. Make sure that responding to those incidents is part of your programs. Don't hyperextend your initiatives, so don't make them so gross and so overwhelming that they can't be consumed. The example of that is to really start out small with your application security programs and get their feet wet and then keep building on top of them until they can actually consume it. Also, I think making every single threat and every single problem the end of the world is going to really, really tire out your executive management. If every time you get an email and you're like, wow, let's shut down the internet because Apple has some cross-site scripting or something ridiculous like that. This case study is what I like to call the boy who cried wolf. You've got a large organization with critical infrastructure. Of course, management is very focused on, all the security vulnerabilities that may be out there. They're driving for mass enterprise impact too quick, too soon, too heavy. So what happens is that, all threats that come down the pipe are nuclear. They're going to freak everybody out, and everyone's just going to not understand at the end of the day what an actual vulnerability or threat is. And that's what I like to call fabricating crisis to create buy-in. It doesn't work. After a while, they're going to stop believing in you. All right. Under paranoid, I think this is fairly intuitive to explain. This really is just an organization that's not paying attention whatsoever. So they have the inability to track and monitor any sort of threats or trends that are coming down the pipe. They're not gathering data. They're not they don't understand what their security posture is. They don't know what their relevant threats are. They're just, okay, we'll deal with it when it comes. So really that just means that they have a complete inability to secure the enterprise. And this is my cyber Pompeii slide. I think I should have changed the name to something else. Cyber apocalypse. Okay, so perfectly paranoid. Using paranoia to your advantage. Be realistic about the threats. Sometimes you don't have to pay attention to every single threat that's coming at your face. Don't throw it into management and have them get all upset about something that is really easy for you to fix. This allows you to catch those unexpected threats when you have the opportunity to and really predict what's going to come down the pipe later on. All of your paranoia is based around data. And I keep stressing data because it's so important. But if you don't back up by data, you're not really saying anything that important to management. So make sure that it's data oriented, and use it as a tool, and be productive in the execution. Okay, being fanatic. This is another thing that we really need to focus on. This is something that generally security is very fanatic about, but the rest of the enterprise is not. These stakeholders are very fanatic. So you've got your external to the enterprise stakeholders, you've got your customers, you've got the regulators, you've got your internal customers to your enterprise. They all need to be achieving the corporate goals, right? You need to be focusing on corporate goals. Remember, you are an enterprise, you're not just a security team. All of your goals need to be realistic and achievable. Don't throw goals out there that aren't achievable so that you're automatically failing your dev teams, right? So that means setting your policy accordingly, and making transitional policies as well. Persevere in ramping up all of your stakeholders. This is key and critical to getting your stakeholders to buy in. Sometimes you have to be in their face. Most often that you don't, but you still have to be that little flea in the ear sometimes. All right, here's the data section. Get a baseline of your organization and your enterprise and find out what you're doing wrong now and put numbers on it. So put some graphs. Make sure you understand where and how and why you're doing it wrong. And move the management with these pretty pictures, right? So sending them a monthly slide deck with information about where your security posture is really moving to them. And including the highlights and lowlights in that slide deck, in red text, in green text, where we're at, where we need to go, where do we need to put more focus on. This sounds really easy and simple, but most, I think, security teams have a hard time accomplishing this because they don't have an understanding of where their baseline is. Also show and socialize the winners. So I like to pit two dev teams together. We've got the bad guys and the good guys. Have them compete to be the best and most awesome developers for security. They have the best security posture. Also compare your data and everything that you're bringing in or everything that you're collecting to the industry trends. So I, for instance, might want to compare myself to NBC or BBC or any other media organization within my vertical. Where are their threats and where are my threats in relation to that? And how mature are my programs in comparison to theirs? Based on the data that you bring in, you probably are more apt to be able to categorize and predict future trends as well. Okay, some things to do and not do in reference to data. Use your data to drive your initiatives, right? Like we talked about with driving management. Use your data to identify and understand what you're doing wrong right now. Baseline, baseline, baseline. Don't overload your stakeholders with reporting. Fine-tune your metrics and your data towards your audience. Don't just throw graphs out and expect people to understand what you're talking about. Don't always stick to the standards. Don't stick to OWASP top 10. Don't stick to SANS top 25. You're going to miss a whole lot of other stuff if you're just doing that. And don't fail to identify and understand your future problems. I really believe that this quote by Eisenhower is true to security in general. We focus a lot on reaction. We're always reacting. And these decisions that we're making during that time are rarely going to be the ones that are the most impactful over the long term. So make sure that you're being proactive about your application security programs. Okay, so how you organize your application security and how you organize the focus on application security or any type of security in your organization is very important. We as security people tend to be very egocentric. We think that what we're doing is the most important thing in all of the enterprise when it's usually not the case. At the end of the day, the business usually wins, so be careful with that. The best way to get around that is to distribute your security throughout the enterprise, through your different development teams. Make sure that you're gaining the confidence of your VPs and development managers and developers. They're going to be the ones that, when you're out of the room, are going to fight for you and fight for all the security issues that you have. Prove that remediation is easy. This is very key. It's super easy to find bugs. It's not that hard. I know that if I threw up all of my applications into a dynamic scanner, I would have a mountain of vulnerabilities that are completely valid. But make sure that if you're going to drop the 500-page report on somebody's desk, that you can show them how to remediate very quickly so that they don't feel like their dev timelines are going to be completely shot because of the security team. And through those situations, create the success stories and encourage them to socialize those success stories throughout the organization. All right. These are the two different types of security-centric or security, the way I think security is distributed throughout organizations. We've got the centralized model and the distributed model. So early application security or early security teams in general tend to be very centralized. There are a couple of guys or girls sitting in a room banging away at stuff and then pushing it out. They're the ones that are controlling the vendors, the executives, development teams, third party, and all of the policy. The distributed model is where everyone is working together. Security may be driving this, but it's really distributed throughout the enterprise as a whole. So every single one of those stakeholders is responsible for security, not just the security team. Okay, building the right staff. Most of these security development lifecycle models have basic roles and responsibilities defined in them. You've got your executives, security champions, security team, and whatnot. The people that you bring into your organization, you need people who are just bug bashers or are dynamic scan operators, but they need to be able to interface with the rest of the organization and enterprise as a whole. So they need to be knowledgeable not just in security, but also in human interaction, believe it or not. Be talented, fanatic. Fanatic is huge. Disciplined, paranoid, but productive, and also data focused. I also want to make a point about rock stars. Rock stars are great to have, but I think at the end of the day, you really need people who can get work done. I'm not saying that rock stars don't do that, but I'm saying that sometimes you just need people who can keep chugging along and don't necessarily need to work on a specific project that falls within their personal interests. So bring those people in, but don't focus on them. And then, of course, spread the skill set throughout the entire enterprise. So that comes down to education, that comes down to awareness. Gaining buy-in. Traditional buy-in, top-down, CISO mandated, policy standards, regulation. These are all things that drive buy-in, make it important and completely mandatory throughout your enterprise. Some other tactics that you can use, metrics, of course. You can't deny data, and you can massage it accordingly. Mandates, MBOs, so tying security to bonuses is a great way to get people to do things. If security is linked to your paycheck, no one's going to ignore it. Put security in the contract language, put it in your mergers and acquisitions language. Use it as gate entry and exit criteria, and also target it from the bottom up, like we said. Okay, utilizing motivations. Motivations, understanding them is key to getting people to do what you want or getting people to buy into security. So like I said, making it a creative competition, making it a game is a really interesting way to get people to buy into it. Create your winners and losers, identify strong security, and also use guilt as a driver. It does work. What's my time? Okay. So here's a case study of an enterprise that's so good that you didn't hear of them. Let's say, for instance, they're a global hedge fund. They've got a huge focus on financial data, the transactions that are going through. They are ahead of the curve. They expect challenges that are coming down the pipe. They're very intelligent, and they have a productive staff, productive being the key word there. they're very performance-based, so security is more than just a mindset, and they ride their incidents with ease. They have strong vision and leadership, and they're never in the news for security. You never hear about them, but they're that good. All right, so from a soft tactics summary perspective, these are the things that I think you should take away and really start thinking about as you're driving application security programs in your organization. Don't overreach. Don't reach for goals that are too hard. Don't try to secure everything tomorrow. Figure out what your biggest problems are and focus on them. Move your goals if you have to. Don't think that just because you're setting a goal that it's set in stone. Don't follow the herd. Don't jump on the bandwagon. Don't overreact in bad times. Don't make people sad and sore because security's in the room. And don't leap for the alluring opportunities. Don't spend billions and billions of dollars on security tools and not implement them. Okay, so the hard tactics, we talked about what hard tactics were. These are the actual security development lifecycle in general. So I like to break down hard tactics by 3 different core components. That's strategy, the actual program itself, and the tactics. Strategy is where we're talking about objectives and goals, long-term and short-term goals, the organizational tolerance for security, what's their appetite for consuming security or application security as a whole, or even any type of security. The program itself, so communications is a big portion of it, policy and governance, roles and responsibilities, key performance metrics, and tactics are the actual classification of vulnerabilities, execution, the process itself, the action items, and the results. So when you're setting up an application security program, when you're actually starting to design it, use all of these 3 core components simultaneously. So don't just focus on one, right? Don't just focus on setting up the strategy and not getting any data to back it up. You can use that data and the tactics to actually drive your programs. So this is an evolving, continuous cycle of application security programs. So this is something that you want to follow all the time. You assess your environment, you're establishing your program, you're executing on it, you're making sure that you're governing the program, and I'm not talking about security, but you're governing your program, and then you're fine-tuning your program. So assessing your environment, let's not play whack-a-mole security. Here's a bug, here's a bug, here's a bug. Let's fix it, here's a bug. Try to find out what you're doing wrong now. What are your pain points? What's your security posture? What are the tactical pieces that you need to fix, right? Are you focusing on SQL injection this week and cross-site scripting next week? Or do you have other issues that you need to look at? What are the strategies that you need to pay attention to? And what's the tolerance? So some of the things that you're going to be doing during this period are enumerating your enterprise assets, and I can't stress the importance of having an application inventory anymore. That's really key to understanding where your problems lie, how old your applications are, what you can focus on from a budget perspective, and how you're going to target those applications in the next year if you can't focus on that now. Doing a quick assessment of all your high-risk applications. So once you have that inventory, figuring out where your problems are, identifying and defining the roles and responsibilities or the stakeholders who you're going to target in the initial early phases of creating an application security program. And then, of course, starting to, from a strategy perspective, socialize your program. This is a lot of this stuff is in the appendix as well, but this is really just identifying who your stakeholders might be. So at the top level, you've got your execs, CISOs, your line of business managers, and then, of course, your dev managers, security managers on the program side, and tactics would be development, QA, vendor support, and vendors on the security side as well. So those are the people that are actually going to get things done. This is a super high-level example of what an application inventory might contain. You've got your applications, descriptions, line of business owner, languages, dev owners, security controls, whether or not they're externally facing, and some of the activities that they may be performing. Okay, so from the assess phase, the next steps, you want to envision and prepare for the next steps of the setting up the application security program. Design your program to consume, or the consumption model of the program based on that assessment. and recruit as many groups as early on as possible to participate. So for instance, as I'm setting up my application security programs at CBS, I'm getting someone from each business unit to participate and be the representative and help me get that started. Okay, so creating the foundation of an application security program, setting it as an enterprise goal and not just as a security team goal, and bridging the gap between the business and security here, and defining the implementation timelines here. Common practices, determining short and long-term goals and driving towards them as needed. So set early goals that you can achieve quickly. Create some success early. Also identify where your early SDL integration points are. If it's only one place during the development lifecycle, focus on that. Maybe it's just verification. Maybe you're just doing dynamic scanning at the end of the dynamic or at the end of the security development lifecycle. But that's good enough for now if you're just starting. This is an example of how you might want to set your goals. You set your goals in waves or in phases. So for instance, I've got wave 1 goals being set up my program team structure, focus on policy and governance, look at processes, do a pilot, and look at the rollout plan. And then wave 1.2 would be execute and launch that pilot plan, and then focus on education awareness. So whatever the tolerance is for your organization, you may be far beyond this at your current enterprise, but if you're starting from scratch, this is a good way to start. Okay. And then also tie your application security goals back to the corporate goals. Don't just stick within the security program, because if it's tied back to at least the IT goals, everyone in the IT team or the development teams will get them done. Okay. So setting up your policies, setting up policies early in the establishment phase is a good way to go. Make sure that your policies are transitional. Don't set policies that are too heavy and too hard to consume for development teams early on, because if you do that, then you're going to slow them down. And make sure you formalize that governance and those policies with the sponsors and executives. So make it a co-development process between the two. Find out what their tolerance is for being able to, like for instance, timelines for being able to fix vulnerabilities. Don't set timelines that are too fast or too soon. Insert gates into key process areas. Understand the development process. If you don't have a formalized process in your organization, go to each development manager or business unit owner and understand what their development process looks like and start gating into it, and then drive those gates into the policy. This is a sample of what a process. So once you start getting the policies in place, make sure that your application security testing process is in place too. So you can see it's traditional swim lanes. This is something dynamic analysis testing. So it goes through setting up with the team, testing, sample pen, or very traditional pen testing. Setting up with the team, moving through gathering the data, running it through the dynamic analysis tool, and then pushing out the results, and then remediating, and then pushing back out to the organization. Governing your program, and when I'm talking about governing, I'm not talking about policies. I'm not talking about security governance. I'm talking about the actual program governance. So making sure that you're monitoring your program and understanding that you're driving towards the correct goals in the correct way that you want to, because your organization is going to change over time. So just make sure that you're actually driving your program in the right direction. A lot of the common practices during this phase are gathering the metrics on adoption, which teams are actually remediating, which teams are not remediating, which teams are going through the education and awareness, and then review all of the existing portfolio at specific checkpoints, classify your trends to inform the program, and you'll use this to drive the changes in your program in the future. Status reporting. We all love status reports as security people. So in this phase, or in this area, you're going to be doing things like bi-weekly, weekly reporting, status calls, showing incremental progress, roadblock removal, issue resolutions, metrics and trend reporting. Also make sure to do quarterly business reviews with your application security programs. So you want to be showing at a minimum, at a quarterly level, to your executives where you were, where you're at, and where you're planning on going. These are some sample metrics that I've used in the past to get to show to management. And you always want to make sure that you're customizing your metrics towards management in general. So even just sit down with them and ask them what they want to see. So on the left here, I've got a portfolio snapshot of where I think a lot of my vulnerabilities might be. So in this case, I've got my highlights and my lowlights. I've got my green and my red in there. We have an increase in testing across our applications, but a decrease in retesting. So we're finding the problems, but we're not making sure that they're gone. This is an overview of the top flaws that exist across all of my application portfolio. I've got a ton of cross-site scripting. It's very traditional. It's what you might see in any organization that has a lot of web applications. This is how you can show a team is moving in the correct direction. So this is an application that we threw into a dynamic scanner. It had a bunch of different vulnerabilities in there. Upon every subsequent rescan, they reduce their vulnerabilities over time. This is sum of all flaws, total flaws, remediated flaws, new flaws. So how many new flaws are being introduced into your application portfolio every dev cycle? This is interesting to be able to show which teams are remediating but not learning, right? So which teams are consistently introducing vulnerabilities. Also, flaw density per line of code or per megabyte. Those are different. So you can throw up an application to test, but you may have a small application that has not very many vulnerabilities or a large application that has a lot of vulnerabilities, but that doesn't really tell you what the vulnerability density is of that specific team. So measuring it by megabyte is a good way to go. This is policy adherence. So if you set up a policy where all of your web applications need to disallow or not have any OS top 10 types of vulnerabilities within their applications, you need to show which applications by vendor. So for instance, if you're outsourcing your code, which applications are failing policies, so which teams are consistently introducing and failing your overall policy. You can break that down by business unit, vendor, and development group. So the last phase of my little application security program lifecycle is to really review the program and realign it or adjust it as you need to. There's always changing landscapes, threats, the enterprise is changing, the goals are changing, the capabilities are changing. Make sure you're doing continuous improvement analysis here. So some of the things you want to do here are yearly reviews, quarterly business reviews, portfolio analysis, and also improving the planning of your overall program. Okay, so in summary, we know that the enterprise is changing. We know that the threat landscape is changing. We know that the methodologies that exist out there are cumbersome. All of the programs that you design need to fit your organization and not just be Microsoft's methodology. Make it, company X's methodology. Use best practices, but don't necessarily just focus on those. Use both the soft and the hard tactics, and I think that you'll get pretty far in a short period of time. Any questions? Yeah. Key performance indicators. Yeah. Yeah. It depends on the tolerance. I've seen this happen in 2 months, and I've seen it happen in a year and a half. So depending on whether you're riding on the back of a breach or not, that has a lot to do with it. Or how security focused your CTO or CIO might be. Mm-hmm.
You can have a machine that's not at a subscription level, that's fine. As long as there's enough databases, there's SQL injection, and a web application stuff is very, very important database. But how do you see on asset management, especially screening focus, we just focus on the number of vulnerabilities or type of vulnerabilities?
So let me try to reiterate the question, and you can tell me if I'm understanding it correctly. So focusing more on the threat than the actual vulnerability, right? Which is what you were discussing in your talk. I mean, of course, knowing what your crown jewels are and what matters to you in your organization is obviously very, very important. So if I'm CBS, I think the data that I care about that's publicly facing is going to be my websites, right? Like the thing that Reuters went through the other day, that was, I believe, a WordPress vulnerability. That was was it SQL injection based? I don't remember. But they were able to fabricate news. That to me is more of a threat than perhaps the average cross-site scripting in a forum. Yep.
Would like the last enterprises, did you ever discover that as a security tool? Like how do you detect security tools in that way? How do you create a measure like that?
How do I create effective measure by identifying?
How do you measure the number of security tools
per megabyte? It's automated analysis at the end of the day. That's a very tool-focused approach, because if you have a ton of applications, you can't measure that really by hand.
What's the methodology of the tool?
I don't understand the question. I guess I'm not understanding what the question is.
Well, you have a number which is number of security tools per megabyte.
Uh-huh.
How do you reach that number?
So let's say, well, you understand or you know how big, so let's say for every 10 megabytes you detect 50 flaws, right? You can figure that out by analyzing all of your applications. For
Megabytes of code, megabytes of
binary.
binary. So you analyze the binary, put the code, and you keep to this number.
Yeah, that'd be a static analysis, yeah. 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 Yeah, I mean, that's precisely what I'm doing at CBS now. It takes a lot of selling, which is something that we don't like to do as security people, I think, or tech people. It's hard, I think, and that's a generalization, of course, but we're not necessarily salespeople. So you have to be, I think that's where the data comes in. So if you're able to show that you have a lot of problems that need focusing on, and show it in a way that is important and reflects the enterprise specifically, that helps you sell it. So it's almost a campaign, like, right? So I have a whole plan around a communications campaign for how I'm going to get people to listen to me. Tailor it to who you're targeting, right? Yeah, okay, so for instance, at your next town hall, bring in someone who has experienced a breach and start talking about how they went from zero to hero, I think is a good way. There's other ways to do it. You can have seminars, look at Blue Hat, that's a great way to do it. It doesn't necessarily have to be FUD oriented, I believe. The bandwagon, I think, stay clear of. You can scan for configuration issues too. Configuration issues are not logic, they're not mutually exclusive, I think. I don't think that configuration and logic issues are the same thing. They can be, but I think if you're talking about business logic, I think you're talking about control flow. Uh-huh. I think, okay, so if I have the problem that you're describing, and I have a lot of applications, so I'm not sure which applications are sort of traversing across my enterprise, right? The application may be important in one area and may not be important in the other area. What I would do is rank all my applications by business criticality, and then I would take the ones that are super important and do almost a threat model on them, or a threat model automated analysis, and if it's super important, code review and pen test, and I would tackle it that way. But I think it's a difficult problem to solve for every single application that's moving.
You have I'm assuming that you have a team that works with you to use HR, help them in training and implementing.
I can barely hear you.
Do you use HR, or do you have a security team that works with you? Getting an implementing.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of different ways to describe security team. There's, of course, the people that are full-timers hired on executing your initiatives, but you've also got your extended security team. So, for instance, if you got a SaaS, if you got a lot of tools or services that are SaaS-based, you can extend your team outside of the organization. Of course, you have to put the appropriate controls in place for extending your team outside. For HR, I don't specifically focus on HR other than from an incident response perspective or a forensics perspective.
More questions? We're plenty of time.
Did I finish early?